Hi, Bill.
Howdy.
Okay.
Okay, I'm hoping you're seeing good news.
I can't understand why,
Art, good news and follow-up.
because I'm muted.
Um, okay, so we had all these protests this last weekend. That's good news indeed. Almost twice as many protests as there were at the beginning in 2016. So thank you, Pepper,
Sit
for
here in this chair. This is
sending along some of these announcements. Here's Omaha.
No, I'm fine.
The good news is that,
We just started.
this terrible revolution
Tariffs are
thing, there's no legislation yet.
non-existent funds.
I see. Oh, there.
So there's no enduring legislation yet.
I can't mute it. It's a map.
So Anchorage, Missoula, Salt Lake City. All right. And then last week we did fast growing religions, a follow up. This article was quite timely, came out right after. And one of the placards here is women in favor of polygamy. So we didn't talk about that last week, but there's an argument that women, more than one woman in a household, more than one wife, makes raising kids more communal, makes cooking more communal. I guess this is what these women who are advocating for polygamy are referring to. Also religion, we were talking about that. Theocracies are really playing a big role in the world these days. And here, this graphic shows at the center Israel, which is appropriate. I'll explain why in just a second. But the conflict with Tehran, that is probably the most dangerous confrontation when it comes to Israel being a nuclear power. And the previous nuclear flashpoint was India and Pakistan, and that was Israel religion based now, especially since India's taken a turn to Hinduism. Pakistan was from the very beginning an Islamic state. So the other disturbing analysis from the Economist is there's an unrestrained Israel loose now, and it's reshaping the Middle East. There was even one Israeli politician who talked about Israel influencing the politics from the Nile to the Euphrates. That took me aback. Just a review from last week, we saw this inflection point where the major religions started growing again. And what was this? This was the Six-Day War in 1967. And the theory is that this was the first domino emboldening jihadism. And the looming towers were in Beirut. And I told you all about this special report from The Economist, just making that point. I'm just emphasizing it because it seems to be true. The world is a lot more religious than it has been. And of course, Islam is seeing it as a crusade. But the problems within Israel are considerable. If you look at the change in trust within Israel over the last 6 years, it's dropped.
We have that same problem
For
again.
both the Army, which is the most trusted institution, but government is below 20%. And Israelis are looking at their prognosis for their country. And in the last 6 years, it's gone from kind of so-so and good to a very bad. So let's see. Sorry. That's kind of ominous. So you have on the map here, of course, all the Israeli outposts separating them from Lebanon and Syria. And you have now a religious based regime in Syria. We'll see how that works out. But there's talk now in Netanyahu's cabinet of annexing the West Bank and just being done with it. And Netanyahu is tied to the extreme right wing in his cabinet because if his government falls, he'll probably have to go on trial. So it's all very, very fraught, religion in the world. How are Jews in the diaspora feeling about all this? They have this uneasy, unwanted, in many cases, alliance with the extreme right wing. And we've seen the 7.3 million Jews in Israel are already a little on edge. And so are the 6.3 million Jews in America, and then spread around the world, another 6.4, for a total of 21 million Jews. So this was a very interesting analysis. Switching gears, just an update on Ukraine and Trump's handling of Ukraine. So just looking at right-wingers and their perception of Russia, right-wingers in Europe and in 3 countries, Britain, France, and Germany, and we see that Reform UK, they have the most, they're the most suspicious of Russia, just outright an enemy. France, less so, and the most apologetic towards Russia is in Germany, the alternative for Deutschland. And then looking specifically at Trump's handling of the Ukraine, just understanding this graph, it looks at being above water or underwater, where your approval rating is better than your disapproval rating, and the net of that. Unsurprisingly, Trump gets his best rating. He's most above water, which in this case would be 75% in favor and 25% disapproval. That puts him among Republicans at 50% above water net. And now you can see it's no surprise that the Democrats are much less. Looking at Poland, it's kind of so-so. But Germany, the alternative for Deutschland, is the only party that's approving where Trump's above water. The very right-wing party that both J.D. Vance and Elon Musk have cozied up to, which is in itself disturbing. In Britain, Trump's below water with all the parties, as he is in France, even further below water on the handling of Ukraine. Now I'm going to turn to the top story these days, the economic situation, where you've had a 3 trillion with a T, drop in wealth, in global wealth. Envy of the world, but what is that? That's only the top 10%, really, in the Western world. Countering that is Trump's base, his MAGA populist anger in the Rust Belt. No one is envious of the opiate pandemic. No one, and we've had a real failure of job retraining in this country. I think I said last week, Denmark spends 6 times as much on job retraining as we do, and then all the cultural stuff just reinforces this populist anger. And so the Trump's talking point on the tariffs, and as the stock markets around the world fall, the talking point is the bottom 50% of the population doesn't have any stocks, the bottom 50%. And the top 10% of the population has 88% of the stocks. The real political fallout for Trump and his economic policy is the top 10%. So you see the top 1% has 54%, really, and the next 9% throw in another 35, and that gets you to 88% in the top 10% of the wealthy people in the country. If you go to the top half, that puts you almost at 98 or 99, and the bottom 50%, very little. So that gives a little different perspective on the envy of the world. And Trump, that's his base. You remember he just blurted this out after he won a primary that he loved the poorly educated. But the poorly educated aren't actually necessarily the poor. A lot of blue collar workers do quite well, but the uneducated don't have as high a social standing traditionally, and so Trump recognizes that these people need prideful messaging, which he does, and of course the left has done the same in lifting up members of their coalition. The uneducated now are part of an odd Republican coalition that contains traditional evangelicals, and this is what we talked about last week, and this we in our survey of American religion. We saw that the evangelicals in the early history were fueled by awakenings and revivals and camp meetings. And are Trump rallies kind of in a tradition, in that same tradition? Is he kind of a circuit rider for his populist MAGA base? And then another odd part of the coalition, which I'm going to spend the rest of today talking about, is Elon Musk and the other techno-libertarians in Silicon Valley. And unfortunately for the Democrats, we seem to have lost them. I'll talk about that a little bit later. But the burning question of the hour is who could stop Trump's view on tariffs. The populists don't necessarily care unless they are among the few that own stocks. And are the tariffs intended to help boost up the lower half of the population that doesn't own stocks? Musk is probably the only person that could turn this around. He's friendly with China, and he opposes tariffs. And he's directly contradicted Trump when he was speaking to Italian right-wingers. And he thought that the United States and Europe should create a tariff-free zone. So that's a direct challenge to Trump's current turmoil. Peter Navarro, who is Trump's tariff economist, retorted that Trump just wants to sell cars. And here he is. He makes an awful lot of Teslas in China and sells a lot of Teslas in China. So this is going to be an interesting confrontation. And I think it just started. It just started. We've seen Musk square off against Steve Bannon and win over cutting social services in DOGE. And now it's Peter Navarro he's squaring off with. He's the real China hawk. So I can take a break there. Somebody had their hand up.
Yes, I did, just briefly. The European Union and UK tariffs, for that matter, on US goods average about 3%. They're pretty close to zero already. And leaving us, the only long-standing tariff I think the US has on European goods, as well as Japanese, it was the 25, it's been around for 50 years, it's the 25% tariff on the import of European trucks into the US. And that's been a targeted tariff for almost as long as there's been a Ford 150. So yes, Musk has a point about zero tariffs being the way to go with Europe.
Wait a minute. We're having a problem with our sound system here. Okay, we're fixed. Yeah, that's an interesting observation. What does Denmark have any particular kind of tariffs on American goods?
No, Denmark is a member of the European Union. The tariffs are bordered by the European Union. Denmark doesn't have any specific tariffs. What Denmark does have, and these are all part of non-tariff barriers, but they're generalized, is they have a 100% excise duty on the import of any motor vehicle, which is probably why so many Danes ride bicycles to work.
I thought they did that for global warming and good health.
Mostly it's because they have no hills.
Yeah, okay. All right. Interesting. All right. So Peter Navarro is the China hawk, and he's the Trump advisor that's behind all that. And now we got a face-off. Elon Musk just called Navarro dumber than a sack of bricks. So there we go, dumber than a sack of bricks. The battle is joined. $3 trillion have already been lost in global wealth. And we'll see if Trump can prevail. But Trump is very interesting. But before I start about it, he was not the first aboard the Trump wagon in Silicon Valley. The history on that is fascinating. It's Peter Thiel. He is an entrepreneur that first defected to the Republican Party, and this is him speaking at the National Convention. I remember he's gay, and Trump alluded to that as he was speaking to the Republican convention, and it was well received by Trump's base, and Trump just expressed appreciation that they didn't boo him for saying that, because that was what was worrying him. So Peter Thiel, his money reached in and financed J.D. Vance's run for the Senate in Ohio. Why would he do that? Well, let's just look at Vance's bio. After graduating from law school at Yale, he practiced for a couple of years, but he moved to the Bay Area. He moved to San Francisco and worked as a venture capitalist. And between 2016 and 2017, just as Peter Thiel was becoming a Republican, J.D. Vance was working for him. And at this point, J.D. Vance had called Trump a Nazi. Okay, so he got flipped and followed the same path that Peter Thiel followed. And as I said, Thiel financed his Senate campaign in Ohio and bailed him out a couple of times when he was dipping into the polls. So Peter Thiel's now got this network among prominent Silicon Valley folk. And we'll get back to this network because it's interesting in the way they've flipped and become techno-libertarians that can follow along with Trump. and we'll get some clues as to how Silicon Valley became so enamored of techno-libertarianism. And to do that, I want to spend a little bit more time on Elon Musk's background, because he's probably the first among equals of that bunch. And Jill Lepore, who's a historian at Harvard, wrote a very interesting essay for the New York Times titled "The Failed Ideas That Drive Elon Musk." And I want to go into that in detail. It was so good. He presents himself to the world as a futurist, with the rockets and the robots and AI and DOGE replacing federal employees, and he somewhat with grandiosity declared to a jubilant crowd, "We're at a fork in the road of human civilization, and I want to take DOGE to Mars." And that seems kind of strange, but when you look at his life and his family tree, we get some understanding of why he has these ideas. And it's his maternal grandfather, Joshua Haldeman. And Lepore says, few figures in public life are shackled to the past, which she's going to make the point that his relationship, particularly to this grandfather, explains an awful lot. So the grandfather was born in Minnesota, so he was born an American, and his mother was a chiropractor who immigrated to Canada when his grandfather was an infant. His grandfather was born in 1902, so we're talking about the beginning of the last century. And so being born in America, he was a dual citizen of Canada and America. And so when he was 30, civilization took another fork in the road. And Lepore makes the point that Musk wants to go back to that fork and choose a different path. And what path was that? It's the path that his maternal grandfather was tried to take. And so what was that path? First of all, you got to understand, like his mother, he became a chiropractor and a rancher, but most markedly, arrestingly, a conspiracy theorist who was obsessed with science and technology, and tried to introduce concepts into politics with great flamboyance. He took risks. He performed at rodeos, and he was, like Elon, fascinated with escaping Earth's gravity. He was an aviator known as the Flying Haldeman up in Canada. And his beliefs took him to a sort of utopianism, a technology utopianism, and the Depression just radicalized him completely. And in addition to the Great Depression, they had their version of the Dust Bowl. So he lost his land, he lost his ranch, and was very bitter and stayed bitter the rest of his life at what he thought, who he thought was responsible for the Great Depression. And it was communists, banks, the media, universities. Sound familiar? And he wrote a book called The Invisible Government, which he said was afoot in every country. And his book was The International Conspiracy in Health. So we got a few doctors here today. He was very much for not fluoridating the water, not pasteurizing the milk, and it was against mass vaccinations, an RFK clone. Here's the family tree. I won't spend really any time on that. Just Haldeman promoted what he said should be referred to as the technate, an army of scientists and engineers. And I'll just hasten to add, if you go back to the Wilson administration and the progressive movement, there was a wing of that also talked about a elite group of bureaucrats that could, with great wisdom, manage the economy. In Canada, it grew to 250,000 members, and they dabbled with the ideas of replacing democracy and popular voting, that the technocracy could manage things without input from the populace. And we think about DOGE. Haldeman railed that the government should be more efficient and that some agencies could be shuttered. And 90% of the courts could be abolished. So why are we all interested in history? Because it can somehow inform what's going on currently, and I think Lepore is onto something. So the other point she makes that at the height of the Depression, it wasn't crazy to be in favor of a technocracy. After all, progressives had been in favor of it before. And it was possible for thoughtful people to believe. And the New York Times, her research showed that they published more than 100 stories about this movement. By the way, Haldeman wanted the U.S. to annex Canada. Sound familiar? Haldeman thought that it would be easier to manage a country if people didn't have names, if they just had numbers. And here's his number right here. By the way, Musk has a son who is named that. So you can't make this stuff up. He eerily believed, Haldeman, that the West had been the subject of masked mind conditioning. And he blamed the university professors for spreading lies, newspapers, magazine, radio, television. They were all complicit and foisting what he thought were unreasonable theories about the equality of races, the immorality of apartheid. You'll see that he became a great fan of apartheid. Remember, Elon Musk was born in South Africa, And convinced that the government was riddled with waste and inefficiency, foreshadowing DOGE. So he thought that a watchdog financial agency was needed as part of his technocracy. The reason he failed was democracy succeeded, particularly the New Deal, FDR. We could pull our politics together and pull ourselves up by the bootstraps. But if it hadn't, if FDR hadn't been so wise, who knows where we would have wound up. But technocracy died. It had its day. The New Yorker magazine said it's gone. It was characteristic of Americans that like to try things, give things a whirl, and then it went the way of the dodo bird in miniature golf. The other problem that Haldeman had was Italian fascists were giving the right wing a bad name. And in 1940, as war was looming, there already was a phony war in Europe beginning in 1939, and Canada was part of the Commonwealth and therefore gearing up to support England, Great Britain. Canada banned technocracy and redoubled its war effort. Haldeman took out an ad and tried to instill a national patriotic movement. That it failed. He was on the United States, where he was a citizen, remember. They didn't let him come back in because of his reputation. So where did he go? Elon's mother was born in Canada in 1948, the same year that South Africa announced their new policy of apartheid. So he moved to South Africa and became a conspiracy theorist there. He even spread conspiracies about Nelson and Mandela, saying that a certain uprising had been staged. And then he went on to write a book about South Africa's apartheid. So this was not a casual relationship. Remember, he was a pilot, and in his leisure and his spare time, he flew around South Africa looking for the lost city of the Kalahari. And this was a legend that had spread in South Africa ever since another Canadian immigrant in 1885 had been the first Westerner to cross the Kalahari. And he reported on seeing a lost city, which probably was this interesting rock formation from a distance. Haldeman finally, after taking so many risks, met his death in a plane crash in 1974, when Elon was just the age of 3. So this maternal grandfather loomed large in Musk's family.
Hey, John.
Yeah.
I have 3 thoughts.
Yes.
Pilots and amphetamines, amphetamines were just discovered then. But the other two are Haldeman, any relationship to J.R. Haldeman, implicated in the Kennedy killings. And the third one is you haven't mentioned what to me is the elephant room, which is Nazism. And what is the overlap there between, apartheid and if there is any with, this scientism, the religion or the anyway, that relationship.
Yeah, of course, fascism and I guess I mentioned Mussolini because he got a head start. He got a 10-year head start over Hitler. I'm sure that the Nazis who were attacking the mother country, Great Britain, were also bad. Yeah, Harold.
John, this is all very interesting. It's good history and it's good background. But on your slide, the bottom line, his grandson, Elon Musk, was just 3 years old when this guy died. How in the world can you make a case that the grandfather has all this influence on the present day Elon Musk? I'm calling bullshit. Really?
Epigenetics.
You need to read the biography of Elon Musk to find the full story. His father beat the crap out of him and expected too much and his father had a hell of a lot more to do with Elon Musk turning out the way he did than his grandfather who died when he was 3.
Yeah, Lepore did not mention the father. And
so you've read the wrong book. You need to go back and read his biography. It's very well done.
Walter, I heard Walter Isaacson interviewed, and he's probably the biography you're talking about.
He's the guy. He spent hours, weeks, years with Elon, one-on-one, getting the story, getting the background. Interviewed Elon's sister and his mother. It's a very interesting read, and it gives you a much better explanation for why Elon is Elon than his fact that his maternal grandfather was a Nazi or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I'm leaning heavily on Lepore. It was interesting. Isaacson said he had, of all the subjects that he's written biographies on, he had the best access to Elon. Elon had no separation, allowed him to accompany him into meetings. So I guess the first thing I would wonder, and maybe you could look at the index and see what Isaacson wrote about Haldeman. I don't have the book. I just remember the interview. So we'll see what that says. Yeah, Jim.
Yeah, I don't mean to pour more onto you, John. I sent you a video which I don't think you've seen. It's from either Democracy Now! Or Amanpour and Company, where the author of another biography of Haldeman and also, I think, touched on Peter Thiel, as they were both had descendants of people who were Nazi supporters and, of course, apartheid. It's a fascinating interview. It's only 10, 12 minutes long.
Okay.
I'll send it to you again, and you can circulate it or not.
I'll send it out in the link with the video.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks. So Elon moved to Canada in 1989. He studied the University of Pennsylvania, went to Stanford. We got a few people from Stanford, but he left the PhD program to become an entrepreneur. He started a company called X, so he's been using X for quite a while in 1999. And Lepore says it's no coincidence that he dreamed of transforming the banking industry, given that his grandfather had planned to abolish banks because they were bandits or bastards. And he that ended in success at PayPal. And when he sold out of PayPal, he made his first fortune. And who did he start PayPal with? Peter Thiel. And so it was not a harmonious relationship. Thiel thinks that Musk is a fraud, basically, but they've made up since their that point. It's a love-hate relationship, and Thiel eventually forced Musk out. He had attained the position of CEO. But Thiel manipulated the board behind the scenes and threw out Elon. But he had his fortune, and that's where he started. Yeah, Harold.
You're muted.
This is the famous "you're muted."
Harold, you're muted.
All right,
now I'm unmuted.
Well,
Elon wanted to make that company a bank too, and Thiel didn't want that, so that was part of the reason they forced Elon out.
Is that right?
That's part of what was in the biography.
Okay. All right. Interesting. So he purchased Twitter, and Lepore points out the similarity between trying to eliminate the woke mind virus and his Haldeman's notions of masked mind conditioning. And Lepore has looked at the technocracy manuals of the 1930s, and it says there's a similarity to what DOGE is doing. So what I was interested in is how he got involved in going to Mars. And Lepore says that early in his life, he became an aficionado of science fiction and interplanetary travel. And a lot of these novels are dystopian, like The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which he identified as being one of his favorites in his childhood. And this is interesting to me because my next door neighbor, who's a Canadian, got me to read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And I was reading it and I said, wait a minute, this sounds too much like The Sirens of Titan, which was written by one of my author who is 20 years older than me, but he grew up in my neighborhood in Indianapolis. And in fact, many of his novels, there's scenes that take place in Indianapolis. And so I researched it to see if there was some connection between Adams and Kurt Vonnegut, and it led me to a article about his Adams years on BBC Radio, where he had a science fiction program, and some of the transcripts when I searched for Vonnegut and Adams, some of the transcripts came up, and he said that he was heavily influenced by Kurt Vonnegut and the Sirens of Titan, which I found absolutely fascinating. The Economist had this great article about, well, what is the possibility of a spacecraft getting to Mars? And they pointed out Trump declared in his inauguration that he called Americans to pursue our manifest destiny into the stars. So the expansion that we began at the Appalachians goes on. He repeated the aspiration in his message to Congress to plant the stars and stripes on the planet Mars. And then what's involved? Well, it's fairly simple if you've got a lot of time, but there's only going to be 2 windows. It's about every 2 years that there's a window between the Earth's orbit and the Mars orbit. And so when Earth and Mars are about here, separated by 44 degrees, you've got to launch. And then the vehicle will meet Mars 8 months later. And then the return trip is of course fraught. And the other problem would be when it meets up, Earth would be on the other side of the sun. So they didn't say what sort of communication problems there would be. And okay, you get there 8 months later, but will we know about it? As I said, there's only 2 of these windows opening roughly every two years. So there would only be an opening, a window in 2026, and then the second window would be the end of 2028. When Trump presumably is leaving office. We won't talk about the presumably. Unless it was going to be insanely risky, there should be more than one uncrewed precursor landings. The first precursor landing, the next window of opportunity is late 2026. Musk may not have the time to see his dream come true. Yes, Steins.
Well, I was just going to comment. Well, maybe you're going to get into this, but he's had a number of failures of his rockets.
Yeah.
And his approach, his attitude towards that is, well, you learn from every one of these failures. Fortunately, those have not involved human life so far.
Right.
John, the other thing that is worth mentioning is we've already had a couple of missions go to Mars. And one famously did horribly because they forgot to equate meters and feet. But it's a very tricky technical thing to do. And I was at the Museum of Science in Boston a few months ago, and they had a brand new exhibition in their big dome about the whole space program. By the way, by SpaceX and Artemis, and NASA as well. But they talk about it takes £1 million pounds and $1 million to get 1 pound of anything just to orbit the Earth. And then it takes probably, 10 times that to get to Mars and probably 20 times to get back. So the use of energy and money and distraction from what's going on the planet, to me, is a huge issue that I think you have to think about.
Oh yeah, no, it's amazing that Trump has put that into 2 speeches. This speaks to Pepper's point. Musk in last October astonished the world by catching a super heavy booster that would be required to go to Mars. So caught it in midair, this super heavy booster he's been working on. But as Mike said, there have been 2 explosions of the upgraded Starship that would also be involved in going to Mars. And it's hard to believe with these setbacks that anything would be ready to go by 2026, especially if you're going to have
1 year from now.
test launches. And the other problem is going to Mars is not the only game in town. There's been this Artemis moon landing project that we're kind of familiar with because our son who does space technology, was working on the Artemis moon landing. The Starship is involved in multiple steps, so there's a dual use of a couple of the technological advancements that would be used to get to Mars and to get back to the moon in this Artemis moon project. And what is that? It was to get humans to the moon again. I don't have time to go into all this. But it's quite fascinating.
Excuse me, wasn't that the reason why we were going to do the Artemis, was so that we can go from there to Mars?
That was going to be a preliminary step, is to put a colony on the moon and launch to Mars from the moon, which would make it cheaper.
And John, that's exactly what they advertised at the Boston Museum of Science. In fact, getting to Mars is the 5th step. Getting up to space, going to the moon, establishing a colony. So it's a long path.
Yeah. I've got to wind down here. The Artemis, you might remember, is the moon goddess, also known as Diana. Homer and I remember our first lecture in medical school being on the breast. Diana and Artemis have multiple breasts. But Mike Pence was the champion of the Artemis project, and they were touting putting the first American woman on the moon and the first person of color. But now that violates DEI, so they last month took that commitment quietly off of the website. China, it's not that we're the only game in town. We're competing with China, and they're unencumbered by the dual-use Martian dreams. So they don't have the hurdle of getting things to work for both the moon and Mars. They are way ahead with their robotic missions. We're way behind them, and there's a low probability that we can get to the moon before the Chinese. And here are the Chinese astronauts, which takes us back to the 60s in America and Kennedy's promise. This just looks at other options instead of pursuing with Artemis. I'm going to have to stop. I'm just going to finish with this. Musk may be driven to take unreasonable risks. And the article suggested, well, what if he found a kindred spirit who would volunteer to go to Mars without a well-outlined route back home? And you can't make this stuff up. And he makes the point that is Musk, with this wild dream, technocratic dream, using America as a booster stage for his own multiplanetary human manifest destiny. So I think that's where I get to. Well, here, this last slide. This is Lepore's concluding thoughts, that you can find so many of Musk's beliefs of social engineering in his grandfather, but Musk doesn't have any much more of what she called political imagination, but he does have this tenacity regarding technocracy and the hubris of Silicon Valley. But her plea is technocracy is incompatible with freedom. So that's where I'll stop for today and open up for comments and further questions.
Hey, John?
Yeah.
The one that jumps out, I don't know if anybody else has seen the movie, The Martian. But of course, it's exactly that, a man who's left stranded on Mars. But the crew comes back, whips around Earth, whips back there, grabs him by the edge of his glove, and he makes it home to teach at the university.
Yeah,
for those who haven't seen it.
That was Matt Damon. He made it home, and as I remember, he made it home with Chinese help, right? For those.
No. He went home with the Americans. Yeah, the American crew went winging back. I don't remember the Chinese piece of things.
Oh no, the Chinese were an important part of getting a booster for the way back home, and I took it as being one of the most optimistic comments on geopolitics, but we're so far away from that now. Yeah, Homer.
Thank you, John.
But it's also, sorry, so go ahead, Homer.
Okay, well, I'm going to go back to the grandparents influencing grandchildren issue. One, I like the idea that a grandfather can have an influence on a grandson. Just to tell the personal story, my father was obsessed with escaping the gravitational fields of Earth and started corresponding with Goddard as a student at Stanford, and ended up flying the first rocket-powered aircraft at Marks Field in 1941, at least the first flown by an American for sure, and dreamed of going to the moon and was invited to the dinner after the moon landing at Mrs. Goddard's insistence. So that's my father. Our grandchildren, two of the households have a picture of the first rocket-powered flight on the living room wall. One has also a portrait of the great-grandfather of those children. And one of those grandchildren, my grandchildren, great-grandchildren of my father, insists that I take him to the California Science Museum in Los Angeles last week to look at the space capsules because he's so obsessed with the idea of going to outer space. So for some reason, maybe it's the power of this particular idea and its connection to the human imagination, what drove Polynesians to sail off into the Pacific. Who knows? But it's something that definitely is translatable from generation to generation.
Interesting. Thank you, Homer.
You're welcome.
Yeah, Mike.
One of the things I would like, you didn't bring it up, but it's something that I've been worried about, if you will, is Musk's ownership of the Starlink network, which is all over the place, linking a lot of various countries and so on. And conceivably, he could use that as some kind of, I don't know, ransom, some way of getting his way with other countries. He could turn off that network and basically they'd no longer have internet and this, that, and the other. And it's something that people have talked about, that this one guy with his megalomania has control over.
Well, I think he did do it briefly in Ukraine.
Yeah. So, I mean, he's, one never knows what this guy could do when he's throwing his weight around. So, he's a one-man wrecking crew in some ways.
Yeah, Carol.
So I just put a book in the chat that was recommended by the TWIV guys, This Week in Virology guys, and it's called The City on Mars. And it's all about how it's impossible to go to Mars and not a good idea.
Even if you're willing to go one way?
Yeah.
Kamikaze.
Yeah.
Actually, I might add, I went to, the Astrophysical Society, they meet over at the Lindsay Museum, and a couple of years ago, they had a guy talking about the climate on Mars and so on. And perchlorate, if you know what perchlorate is, a very volatile, hazardous chemical. And I don't know there's no water there, et cetera. I don't know what they think people would survive on.
Right. Those are the things that were addressed in The City on Mars.
Interestingly, the Artemis project, their destination is the South Pole because they think there's water there. And if they have a source of water, that makes the logistics for a lot of things, I guess even fuel, more possible. But I don't know if I'll live to find out if there's ice on the South Pole.
Well, and John, just to tie that back to current events, there's a lot of talk about the water in Gaza. It's either piped through from Israel, desalinated. There's a lot of, and so it's and in another twist, perchlorate is in rocket fuel. It's one of the ingredients you mix with oxygen. It's very different. So interesting.
Yeah, you broke up a little bit about Israel. I'm not sure I can.
So just the water to Gaza is limited to Israel, and it's at 10 liters a day, it's considered restricted. So it's a very precious commodity.
Okay. All right. So I think we're done for the day. Check out Carol's.
He was influenced by his grandfather?
About Musk?
Yeah.
No, I didn't learn that.
You didn't learn anything.
No.
What was it about his grandfather?
That was grandfather.